Hey everybody, this is Perch. One of the comments people make on my channel from time to time is that, hey, you're simping too much for Marvel and DC. You need to talk about the indies more. I don't disagree. Other than, simping? It's 2021, but all right, whatever. I would like to talk about indies more. One of the challenges, though, because I asked myself why not more conversation about some of these smaller books. Um, there's actually a pretty obvious, easy answer to this, and it's the same answer that I think is the reason why indies struggle a little bit to get more mainstream recognition. And that's simply this: indies are more short term. What am I mean? And in many cases, yes, Spawn and Savage Dragon have been shipping for a while. I think isn't Dave Sims' book still going somewhere? I mean, there are definitely some books that have a very long running title. Ninja High School, Gold Digger, as well. Lots of years of content. But many indie books are fairly short term. Many, certainly in years past, didn't last to issue 20. And today, most indie series are limited series. They are lucky if they get to issue 6 or issue 7. And in some cases, this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The indie book doesn't get a lot of attention that it would need in order to continue, and therefore it goes short. But because it's short, it doesn't get a lot of attention, and this cycle continues. But this is one of the areas where indie comics struggle, because I think, and lots of people tell you otherwise, but one of the things that's inherent about comics that is kind of always been part of what comics is this idea that you're jumping onto a kind of never-ending story. I actually can't say that now without hearing that terrible theme song of that 80s movie in my head. Screw you, Falco. Anyway, that's been a lot of the appeal. And comic readers have always hated this analogy, but it's very similar to how people who are big fans of soap operas during the middle of the day on daytime TV feel. They're not jumping into a show short term. They're jumping into an investment. They want to get to know these characters. They want to grow with them. They want to learn about them, and everything else. And in the 80s, certainly 70s and 80s, I think the big two capitalized on this quite successfully by memorializing the issues. I mean, in a lot of cases, and you can see in the letter columns, the stuff to the comic newsletter weekly, those kinds of places, where you had people who would build up for the anticipation of issue 25 or issue 50 or issue 100. These were big milestones people looked forward to and bought into. And there was disappointment sometimes when comics would do a issue 50 and it wasn't double sized or wasn't paying off some big special event or moment or storyline. This was kind of part of comics, was that they could continue. With indie comics, it's been, and I think in this case, it's one of the places where critical acclaim and the mass market diverged. Because if you go back to 2010 or so, you'll see a lot of articles written mainly online by people who talk about, the future of comics is this short form storytelling, original graphic novels, not a big series, but a 6-issue part. And there was a lot of praise given to those. If you look at how the Eisners go and how a lot of the awards in comics are, they tend to reward those short comics that are 6 issues or so long at most, sometimes longer, but generally about that. They tend to really kind of pour a lot of praise into this is how comic storytelling should be done, in quick little bursts with no kind of baggage of continuity and history or characters, and just a self-contained quick little story. And that's fine, but that is also the exact opposite of what the mass market often tells customers, companies, publishers. It's the opposite of what is being shown in the market. Customers like longevity. They like the idea that I can pick up this copy of Spider-Man or Batman, and it's got all this history and it has all this continuity, and it is completely a 180 message from what you often hear in the industry. You'll hear people inside of publishers talk about how these comics are too complicated. This back history is an anchor around our neck. Oh, we hate it. We need to do something new and fresh and different. But almost every time they do something new and fresh and different, the sales suffer. Time and time again, it tends to be a negative rather than a positive, and you know that is an undeniable fact of why indies struggle to keep going, particularly when they are billing themselves as a self-contained story, something small, something low key, something that you won't have, that we're going to end this story, we won't ever come back to it. As long as that's the message, it's shrinking their market. It may mean they get some attention from CBR or Bleeding Cool for being this kind of unique little story, but that's really as far as it gets. And the problem is kind of magnified inside the comic store, where the retailer is really geared towards selling long form stories. They're geared towards selling issue 812 of Spider-Man. That's why when you go talk to a lot of retailers, they will tell you they also don't like renumbering. They don't like relaunching for a very practical reason. Much of their clientele comes in to jump onto a long running story. The retailer likes the idea that not only are they signing on to something that's going to be a steady comic for the next year, but also that there's maybe hundreds of back issues that they could sell this customer. That's the way every retailer thinks. Now, no retailer is going to say, I'm going to completely ignore or avoid, huge comics on the indie market. Obviously, The Walking Dead and Saga found ways to break through. Department of Truth has as well. Some of these other titles have absolutely done, great in terms of sales. But that same retailer will tell you that by and large, the bread and butter of their shop is going to be ongoing Batman, ongoing Spider-Man, ongoing Justice League, ongoing X-Men. That's going to be what brings people in. And they're going to object when you say things like, hey, let's radically reboot all of the X-Men, cancel all the titles, put something new in. Unless that hook is really amazing, the retailers are scared of those things, because to them, all that says, cut through all the marketing hype, is here comes a good jumping off point. Long-term customers, you can stop collecting. Your war is done, and that's that's a negative. So how do indie comics combat that? How do they sell this idea of, no, there's a bigger thing to jump onto here? I don't think they all need to immediately convert to giant ongoing sprawling stories, and I don't think they need to commit to a shared universe either. But this is where the publisher can do a lot more to line up the comics and say, yeah, the title may change, but if you're coming to Boom for horror comics, we're going to always have every month a horror comic here to you. And one of the things they've done in Japan that I think might work well here is that they've had unique titles come out that are shorter, that people know is only going to last one or two volumes, are going to be smaller. Even that is way more than what goes on in the U.S., but still relatively short amount of stories. Let's say 5 to 10 comics in this story, from the U.S. perspective. What they've started to do is, in addition to numbering it like comic issue number 1, issue 2, they put a second number, and they put a kind of an umbrella branding on the same comic saying, this is in the superhero lineup. This is, March issue 14 of superheroes, but this story, and keep in mind, that is convoluted. I don't think that's the best way to do it by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think that there's a clue there of, hey, even when you have something small, even when you have an indie comic, let's try and connect it to other indie comics, other things that we're publishing. So the story to the consumer comes, hey, you're jumping onto a genre or a line or a tone or whatever it happens to be that is big and ongoing. That doesn't solve the problem of the fact that a lot of customers like to see where people's stories develop, watch them over time. They enjoy that aspect of it. This is where, again, comic books and daytime soap operas bear a lot of resemblance. But at the very least, it helps. Indie comics, there's just so many of them. In any given month, when you got 500 copies of 500 different comics going out, and Marvel and DC and Image are representing maybe 180 to 200 of that still leaves anywhere from 200 to 300 comics from the indies that are, by and large, all relatively short runs, all trying to get attention, all competing with each other. And the only often way they can do it is through kind of a cult of personality with the creators, that the creators themselves go out there and say, you want to follow me, so get my book. But there's only so much you can do with that. It's time for the kind of the might of the publisher and the genre to also come into play and start helping to push this thing along so we can get indie books more attention because they deserve it. There's a lot of really good stories out there that go unnoticed purely because they're getting lost in the noise, and because they're not part of this long form storytelling, they have no real ability to build up that credibility. As soon as they start to get an audience, hey, it's issue 6 and the series is over, so now you have to start over again, and that is increasingly a grind. We've got to find ways for indie comics not to have to start over at zero every single time they launch. When your options are basically, work on a long ongoing title for one of the big two where you don't control any of the outcome or the output or the money or the revenue of the characters, or do your own comic, and unless you're a huge name, you're going to have to almost restart your marketing each and every time you put out a book. Those are not great options, and we need to do different things and be better than that. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on what can we do to get indie books, more promotion, more visibility, help. One of the things that will help is just covering more on this channel, which I will do. But broader than that, how do we support them? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for listening.